So what actually happened is when I was doing counter narcotics, the bad guys down south knew there was a gringo looking guy who spoke fluent Spanish, and so the bad guys gave me the name. They used to call me El Gato Amarillo, the yellow cat, because they were trying to find out who I was, and the name just kind of stuck with me.
Yeah, very
Love
cool.
it. Well, okay, so our guest
Well, and
today.
speaking of nicknames, when I was a college debater in, well, I went to Texas Tech and I debated all throughout the Southwest. My partner and I became quite a formidable team. We were really good as freshmen. And we were talking to some debaters from, I think, a college in Kansas who said, oh, this team from Texas Tech is incredible. We can't remember their names, but we call them St. John and Taco Sally.
You were Taco Sally.
Of course. And John was, he's a tall, elegant man. Um, and so I can see why they called him St. John.
Well, I always like to do my only formal thing of these podcast episodes, which is to say, and we have as our guest today, Lue Elizondo, but then Carmen is much more, even more informal than I am. And so I think it's better, Lou, if you introduce yourself. How would you like to introduce yourself?
Oh, I don't care, ladies. I'm just Lou. I mean, if I always get a little bit funny. It's weird. I suffer from like imposter syndrome because people will read off my resume, and it's I know so many people have done so much more than me, and have people say, "Oh, Lou, you're a hero." What I know I'm not, because I've served with heroes, and a lot of them didn't make it back from overseas, and so I've always just introduced myself as Lou. All the other stuff about my academic vitae and stuff like that. I just don't get into it.
Lou, in our previous podcast, at least that we recorded just a couple of hours ago, our guest was telling us about a student he had that was covered in tattoos up to her neck. And he finally asked her why, or, non belligerently, but, was curious. And she had served overseas, and each tattoo represented a classmate
Yeah,
that she had lost that did not come back
yeah,
from her recruitment class or whatever. And I thought, well, okay, that's a very compelling
yeah.
framing.
That's exactly how I feel. Every one of my tattoos is for an experience I had where people, in some cases, didn't come back. And
Mm.
it's a. I don't like, by the way, for the record, I don't like tattoos, but it's. I did it because I don't ever want to forget, the sacrifices of certain people. That's down here in my arms. It's Latin. It says "acceptum paenitio," which means with regret. I know
Mm.
people like to live their life and say, "Oh, I live with no regrets," but in my opinion, if you don't regret it, then you never learn a lesson and you never grow. I think life should be full of regret, and that's how we move onward and upward and make sure that we don't repeat the same mistakes. And so, there were some instances I was involved with overseas that I wish I didn't have to be, but I would do it again if I was called to. And I never wanted to forget the faces of the individuals who never came back, and both sides, by the way, not just our side. The tragedy of warfare is that both sides lose. It just who
Yep.
loses worse. And you're talking about taking the extinguishing of human life in a very violent way. And these people are brothers and fathers and sons and uncles, and for the most part. And I don't think it's fair that I don't like to dehumanize individuals. I think all life tends to be sacred, for the most part. And so I just try to, keep myself in check that way, I guess.
Yeah, I agree completely, and I think it's to just return to warfare. It's the taking of human life in the execution of some kind of algorithm or equation that represents just the very worst of human behavior.
Correct, because at that point it becomes insensitive, and not, it's no longer personal, right? People need to
Right.
recognize that when you take another human being's life, it's the ultimate form of, right. You're taking away something that can never be replaced. That's precious, and you know that it should take a toll on people. because we shouldn't take it lightly. Those old sayings when I grew up in the 80s, kill a commie for mommy. Think about just how nowadays, how disgusting that is to even insinuate, right? So anyways, yes, ladies, I am ready to go. Sorry about
All
that. I
right.
digress.
No, I do think that people talk about how rough it is on special forces and on people who have to take people's lives as part of um, whatever is going on, whatever has failed, whatever diplomacy has failed. And it makes me think that's right. We are hiring the right people if they are troubled by that. And we are hiring the wrong people if they are not troubled by that.
Yes.
Correct.
And I just want to say, Lou, that actually we are already going. This is our style. You said you were ready to
Oh,
go,
fantastic.
but
Great.
we're
Good.
already going.
Oh, good, good, good. Let's rock and roll. Good. I mean, I like I said, I don't want to. I'm always forgive the pun. I don't like to alienate people when talking about my personal experiences because I think a lot of people kind of misunderstand me. They look at me with the wall in the background and the tattoos and my experience in the government and military and intelligence. But I don't think they really have a good appreciation of who I really am. They know
Well,
what I am, but not who I am, if that makes sense.
well, I think your book, so I listened to your book, Imminent, instead of reading it, especially because you read it, which I really loved. And I think your book, one of the things that it did beyond introduce people who didn't sort of know about the world of UAP or UFOs, one of the things that it did really well was explain these are the trade-offs of trying to get something done in the government that you think is a good idea, but you're frankly not sure about. You don't have all the answers, but you have to push for what you think is right. I mean, it's a real study in you and perseverance and also a real study in red tape. And I just think that's so I think you're amending the world's view of you through that book, but also you're amending the world's view of the US government in an interesting way. I mean, to me, it was very sympathetic, even though periodically you would say things like, this section, was removed by the DoD or something. Um, but to me, it made me even more sympathetic to the sort of informational trade-offs that the intelligence community and DoD are having to deal with.
Yeah. Well, Julia, first of all, let me apologize for you having to endure listening to my audiobook, which I did narrate.
Well,
Uh,
stop.
I've often been told that I have the silky smooth voice of a cement truck in high gear careening down a mountain road. So thank you for enduring that. I decided to narrate it myself because I wanted to be sincere, and it was my story, and I didn't feel right imposing that. Look, there's a lot of emotion in that book.
Yeah.
And I had to make a decision early on. Was I going to be completely open or was I only going to tell part of the story? And I can't very well expect and demand full disclosure and transparency from our government if I myself writing the book am not willing to do the same thing. It's a bit hypocritical, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I decided to put a lot of my own personal experiences, knowing that I would make myself extremely vulnerable, which I did, and I would be attacked for it, which I am. But at the end of the day, I I really didn't have an alternative. Either you speak the truth or you don't. And so that's why I decided to do what I did and how I did it. I've always been very careful not to demonize the government. I love the government. I love the citizens. This is a government for the people and by the people. So at the end of the day, it's really about people. I just think that some people have forgotten their roles and responsibilities and their loyalty to the American people. I think when you're in government, I took an oath many decades ago to defend this country from all enemies, foreign and domestic. And it turned out it was the bureaucracy that was part of the enemy. The government does a lot of things very, very good, and I want to see those continue. But I also know there's a couple times when mistakes happen, and the government isn't entirely forthcoming about those mistakes, right, or things that it's done in the past. Um, and especially about a topic like this, where it has invested millions, if not billions of dollars over the course of many, many decades. Meanwhile, telling the American people one thing, and filling the entire topic with stigma and taboo, which was unnecessary. Meanwhile, all along, they're actually conducting real research on the topic. And anybody else who tried to do research, was completely marginalized. And I think that's unfair. I think, like many other things in the government in the past, whether it's Iran Contra, doesn't matter what side of the fence you sit on that, Pentagon Papers, right? The withdrawal from Afghanistan. Other things like, MK Ultra, other things that we did that were terrible, like we did with the Tuskegee men and the syphilis experiments, right? There has to be some sort of accountability. We can't call ourselves the greatest nation in the world if we don't behave like that. And part of behaving like that is being held accountable for any misdeeds or transgressions. And I'm very careful not to villainize and paint the whole government with one broad stroke, because my family loved this country. We came to this country as exiles. My father was in the Bay of Pigs, as it's mentioned in my book. He was a political prisoner in Castro's prisons, and all those men were tortured mercilessly and fed horse hoof from horses as meals. They even did oral surgery on my father, removing teeth without any anesthesia. Terrible experiences, right? So my father came to this country, a country that gave my family tremendous opportunity. Nowhere in the world would I have been offered this opportunity. And so I've often been asked, well, Lou, if this is such a great country and you love it so much, why did you step out of rank? And it reminds me of the words of some of our forefathers that said, look, to be a true patriot, sometimes you have to do things that don't seem very patriotic at the time. And yes, you have to challenge and question your government, because ultimately that government is representative of the people. And I think there are some people in government that forget that. One of my former bosses, who was truly a hero at one point in his career, special operator, and rose himself through the ranks, I think wound up getting emotionally and morally corrupted, and wound up not being such a great leader after all. And that saddens me, because there's a lot of people that have given, like I said, given their life for this nation and for the idea of what freedom really means, and independence, right, and the sanctity of human life. So, anyways, I digress. I apologize. Let's get into the stuff you want to talk about. I just sharing with you a little bit of my personal.
So, so a couple of things, just in reaction to what you just said, and really, as I said, we are going. So
this is what we want to talk about.
This is what
you
we
want to talk about.
Okay.
And at some point, I would like you to, sort of share with our listeners sort of your bottom line on the UAP issue. But I wanted to say two things to what you said. One is, and I served at CIA for 32 years, so I know government intimately, at least through the lens of CIA. And a saying that I was prone to say to people is, there is no such thing as bureaucracy. We all individually choose to become a bureaucrat. So, bureaucracy isn't like a thing that you join. It's a mindset and an attitude that you take on for a whole host of reasons, which we can discuss. So that's one. And then the second thing, you talked about your former boss, who was, I think you said, emotionally and morally corrupted. I'm not exactly sure I got all the words right. And I always think it's important to try to understand whatever situation you're trying to understand, because I'm an analyst, that's my background, from all perspectives, including the perspective of this individual that we're talking about. So presumably this individual would not say that I did what I did because I was emotionally and morally corrupt. This individual would have some other way of expressing what happened. And do you have, and what do you have a sense of what that would be? Because I think that sheds more light on this extremely gray and difficult area of trying to do the right thing in large institutions,
Right,
that have ideological aspects to them, and lots of other aspects like hierarchy and egos and all this other stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, let me, if I can, great comment, Carmen. And let me see if I can explore this a little bit more than for you and your audience. Um, my father passed away a year and a half ago. Basically, he died on Father's Day about a year and a half ago.
So sorry.
And my father, oh, it's okay. I mean, look, he literally died with his boots on. And about a month before he passed, and I just started sharing this story, so I'll share it with you. It's very personal. My father he was a walking contradiction. He was the most philosophical and intelligent person I've ever met. And he was also the most violent, capable of the most violence and rash behavior of anybody I've ever met, right? And so about towards the end of his life, he got much more self-reflective, as I think a lot of people do, end of lifetime. And I knew my father was sick. He didn't tell me, but I could tell. He stopped really eating and he started losing weight, and I could tell the time was coming. And a few times he wanted to talk to me about something, and then I think halfway through realized he didn't want to put any additional pressure on me, and so he kind of changed tracks. But I had the wonderful opportunity and privilege of driving with my father about a month before he passed. I knew it was going to be one of our last trips. And so we drove from Wyoming here, where I live, down to South Florida, right? Typical, where all Cubans live. All of us live there or have lived there at one point. And so I was taking him to go see his sister, and I took the opportunity to go on a nice 3-4 day car drive with him. And about halfway through the trip, I asked him a question. And looking back, I feel a little guilty because I asked the question a little bit flippantly, almost expecting an answer that wasn't the answer I received. And I said, Dad, what do you think is the greatest threat to humanity? And I asked him that question thinking he was going to say something like, I don't know, transnational terrorism, or maybe some sort of epidemic and disease, right? Or the environment. And he looked at me and he was very thoughtful and he said, Son, corruption. I said, corruption? Like financial corruption? He said, no, son, corruption itself. Corruption is the act of giving up or trading off one of your own personal core values in exchange for something else. And so, whether it's financial corruption, religious corruption, governmental corruption, corruption is corruption. And once you are willing to compromise your own moral values in exchange for something, that is a corrupt act. And he said, in government, it's a very slippery slope, because once people start doing that in government, it starts chipping away the very foundation of what democracy is. And if you're not careful, very, very quickly, you can find yourself going from a democracy to a tyranny. And my father would know something about that, right? Fighting in the revolution, first with Castro against Batista, and then later against Castro as part of the Brigade 2506, which I have some of that stuff here prominently displayed. So I think when you're in government, you have a responsibility to always try to take the high road. And there's a funny similarity between politics and diplomacy. I always consider politics and diplomacy, it's really the same act, but for different outcomes, different reasons. Where politics tends to be a selfish act, you give something up in exchange for something else in return that benefits you. Whereas in diplomacy, you give something up in exchange for something in return that serves the betterment of everyone, right? And I think that's a very important distinction. And we've got a lot of politicians in our government. I don't mean just the legislative branch. I mean even in the executive branch. But we don't have any really very many true diplomats. The people that engage in true diplomacy, right, and understand that the betterment of the many outweigh the betterment of the few. And I take that very seriously because I've seen the worst of mankind has to offer, and it's we have to take an active role in what this great experiment is all about. Look at you. I mean, 32 years as a CIA analyst. And I had a chance to work as well with that agency for a little while, and the Department of Defense, and met some wonderful, wonderful people, and just look at the opportunities people like us have been provided. Right now, of course, you've got to maintain it, you got to earn it, but I believe that there's a lot of really good people in government. I also think, unfortunately, there's a few bad apples, and those bad apples, what only takes one bad apple to start rotting the other apples. And so I take it very, very seriously. So again, back to Julia, what you asked early on, regarding tattoos and why people make the decisions they do, and what does it mean. And to me, it's about truth. It's about truth. And in order to get to the truth, if you want to get rid of corruption in our government, and it doesn't matter whether it's about UAPs or it's about anything else, you first have to have accountability. And if you want accountability, you first have to have transparency, right? So these three things all go together. Transparency will lead to accountability, and accountability will lead to the minimization of corruption. And that's why I think in this particular topic regarding UAP, but any other topic, really any other topic we could talk about, that's vital. We have to have transparency and accountability if we want to have an honest dialogue with ourselves about whatever topic it is. And I'm afraid that we're not quite there yet regarding this topic, UAP, and unfortunately many other topics as well.
Ooh, ooh.
Yes, ma'am.
I think I'm going to double down on Carmen's question, but in a different way. So Carmen's second point about perspectives, and what would the perspective be of this person that you were saying was morally or emotionally corrupt? And now I understand your definition of corrupt to be a descriptor, almost not a prescription, but a description of something that you're seeing. And so I think I understand your definition of him better. But what comes to my mind, and what came to my mind early on when you were talking about that the government didn't need to put stigma and taboo on the UAP issue, my question is, I agree that from where we sit, you and I, Lou, our perspective, it's irritating that the government put stigma and taboo explicitly. Like now there's this statement saying like we actually made fun of people like they're from the Air Force saying like we actually made fun of people who researched this and tried to drive that one guy crazy.
There was an actual campaign to do that, to discredit people actively, while on
right.
the other hand, you have them secretly doing the research themselves.
Right. But you had said that the government didn't need to. But I would say, as much as I think from our point of view now, it feels like the government didn't need to. My guess is they felt like they needed to as a protective move. Like they felt like it was a protective move.
Certainly they did. And I understand why. I just don't agree with the reasons why. No, absolutely. Look, there are reasons why government keeps things secret. One of those is to keep information out of the hands of our adversaries.
Yeah.
Another one is to keep information out of the hands of our politicians so they don't start interfering and mucking around in certain programs that we have. And the other reason is to keep information hidden from the American people. And if people don't think that happens, look, I'll be very, very, very frank. Governments only work because the people have invested a good degree of confidence in those institutions and organizations to represent the will of the people, to protect the interests of the people. When people begin to realize a government can't do that, then people start losing faith and confidence, right? And so let's look at, for example, the development of the U-2 spy plane at the time with, I'm sure our friend here can talk to about, Carmen can talk about that, but you had a requirement from the CIA, which then led to the development and building in a very short period of time, the U-2 spy plane by Lockheed Skunk Works. And the idea was to build a plane in contravention of an existing treaty we had with Russia at the time that we would not fly manned reconnaissance missions over mainland Russia. And so what did we do? We built a spy plane that could fly higher and faster than anything anyone had ever seen before. And for the first few flights, we thought we succeeded. Why? Because as we flew over mainland Russia, they didn't respond. So clearly our plane was invisible. It could do exactly what we hoped it to do. The reality is that it wasn't until the Russians developed the SA-2 surface-to-air missile and successfully shot one down and parade, of course, Captain Powers and the wreckage of the U-2 in front of the United Nations and the world, did they ever admit to the world that they had been tracking every one of our flights since the beginning. They didn't even admit it to the Russian people. And why? Because you don't admit a problem for which there is no solution. And at this particular point in time, back in the 70s and the 60s, with all these UAP going on, there wasn't a solution. We didn't even understand the technology or the physics. And so to inform the American people the reality of these things, was a problem. Look, I'll give you another perfect example. When we first discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls, the scientific community, not we, the scientific community, first discovered this Dead Sea Scrolls, it took them years before they released the translation of those sea scrolls. Now, why is that? Because we were afraid it was going to contradict the notion at the time, the current notion of the Judeo-Christian religion. We did not want to upset the apple cart. And so, therein lies part of the problem. And so as an organization, as an institution, as a government, when you spend 70 years building up this active campaign to discredit a topic, and now comes the time where you have to be truthful, that is a very tangled ball of yarn that you have spent decades putting together, and now you have to detangle it in a way where you can save some face. And I understand it's a difficult situation, and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm not trying to out my government. I'm not trying to hurt my government. I'm trying to help my government. I'm trying to do the opposite. I'm trying to help the government. It's now at the point where this is the worst kept secret. Other foreign adversaries have their own UFO programs. That's a fact. They've admitted it. So we're behind the eight ball here. And if we really care about our country, we would start telling the truth now about this topic so we can start moving forward with the scientific, the academic communities, even the philosophical communities, the defense communities, the intelligence community. This is something that it should be kind of an all hands on deck thing. And quite frankly, I don't think, there's aspects of this conversation that certainly fall within I think the silo of national security. And from that perspective, I do want a 3 or 4-star general making a recommendation on, hey, how do we stop incursions into controlled U.S. airspace or interfering with our nuclear equities? But there's a huge part of this conversation that is so much bigger than that. And it involves every single human being, as I've said before, equally and yet differently, depending on the way you were raised and your culture and your religious background. And this conversation affects all of us from a psychological perspective, from a sociological perspective, from a philosophical perspective, from a theological perspective, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not comfortable with a 3 or 4-star general telling me how to consider this topic from those other areas. They're simply not qualified.
Well, and it's not their job. It's not their mandate.
It's not their job.
Yeah.
So a couple of points. At least when I was at CIA, which ended in 2010 when I retired, the discussion about covert action. So I believe the discussion was different before then, but I joined the CIA in 1978 after the church hearings. And so discussion about covert action. So why would the CIA take covert action, i.e. do something secretly without telling, certainly not telling the American people and hopefully nobody else noticing.
Correct.
Doing it within the legal parameters of the U.S. government, but that's it.
Right.
So there's a number of reasons why you would engage in covert action, and these are sort of realpolitik reasons. You want to do something short of war, right? So you don't want to go to war, but you need to do something that involves some kind of kinetic action.
More than diplomacy, less than war.
Yeah, exactly. You want to break international law. Now, controversial, but I have had friends, dear friends of mine who have at various times when horrible things became known about what the CIA had done, I still remember them sitting at my dining room table and they said, well, Carmen, that's against international law. And I remember saying, okay, the CIA and its covert capabilities exist in part to break international law, not to break U.S. law, but to break international law. But the worst reason, not just the worst reason, a reason that should never be justified for covert action as the only reason why we're doing it covertly is because we don't want anybody to know about it. So, so you can do something short of warfare because you really need to solve a problem. And sort of a byproduct of that is that there'll be plausible deniability, right? But the principal reason why you engage in covert action must never be because you don't want anybody to know about it.
Because that's a
And
CYA reason.
exactly. Yeah. And so that was just totally part of how I understood
Yeah. So
covert
Carmen,
action. And so I was in more than one meeting in my career where I was being briefed on a covert action, where I was like, say, and I won't go into any details, but I was like going, this is ridiculous. And the only reason why it's being proposed is because as a covert action is that we want to do something that we would be embarrassed or ashamed about if we did it publicly.
right. So, Carmen, you're great point. So, there's a lot of people out there that don't understand how the intelligence community works, don't really understand even the legalities of covert action. And really, all this stems from originally going all the way back, really to the National Security Act of 1947, right? And so we have Title 10 authorities for the Department of Defense. People start getting nervous. You have OSS, and they're like, look, posse comitatus, we don't want military folks spying potentially even close to it like an American citizen. So then during the CIA Act, they create the CIA and have Title 50 authorities, which Title 50 authorities, as you know, are substantially different than Title 10. Now, the two will work together, but Title 50 authorities are primarily CIA. And under that,
and just to interrupt you just for a second, for Julia's benefit, title refers to U.S. legal
correct. The authorities
statutes,
correct.
So the U.S. legal statutes, there's like
absolutely. So
kind of like in chronological order, Title 10, Title whatever,
yeah,
Title 50.
32, Title 50, right.
Yeah.
So these are the legal constructs that authorize the U.S. government to do certain things. And so you have this Title 50 that came out, and there were some abuses of it. So lo and behold, the Church Committee comes out, and right thereafter, I think it was 1981, you had Executive Order 12333 that talks specifically about the use of covert action. Now, the DoD Title 10, you have clandestine operations, but in covert is different. People sometimes use the terms interchangeably, but they're not. There's actually a specific legal authority to conduct covert action, and the two operations are different. Where clandestine operations are to hide the actual mission, covert operations hide the sponsorship, meaning who is behind actually doing the job, and you're supposed to do that as Carmen, as you said, to avoid war and try to protect Americans. What you don't do it for is expressly to either cover malfeasance or to cover embarrassment or a mission that you find objectionable, that the world would look at you and you'd be embarrassed. And therein lies part of the problem, because we have abused the U.S. classification system for so long to do exactly what it's not to. In the Department of Defense, you have actually something called DoD 5240.1 and .1R that talks specifically about the inability to classify information simply because you're trying to hide something embarrassing, right? Or to cover up a crime. And it's in multiple directives. The DoD CIO directive also talks a little bit about it. And then there's, I think it's, there's another one specifically, I'll have to look it up, on the classification system of the Department of Defense. And by the way, the DNI has the same thing, Director of National Intelligence, through what we call ICDs, Intelligence Community Directives. They used to be called DSKIDs, as you remember, Carmen, right? DSKID, slant, whatever, right? Remember those days? And so, yeah, it's, you don't abuse that power and authority to do things. You just simply don't do it. For example, if let's say you're a street cop, for your audience out there who might not understand the intelligence world, you have the authority to conduct a traffic stop. You don't have the authority to just search someone's car whenever you want. Or if you're on a surveillance mission, you can't just go into someone's house and start putting recording devices in their bathroom. You can't do it. There is a series of steps and checks and balances that have to take place. And unfortunately, that system has in the past, but as it relates to UAP and other issues, has been abused and violated. And that's the problem. That comes to accountability, right? So that comes into transparency, accountability. And the ultimate question is, what do we do once we hold these people accountable? Here's my opinion. I could be completely wrong. I'd love to know what you, Julia, and Carmen think. There's a lot of people out there that want their pound of flesh. They say we should hold these people up before court. We should fire them, take away their retirement, and then what we should do is put them in jail. I don't think so. I think these people, like you said, Carmen, thought maybe they were doing the right thing at the time. I think what we do is we give them amnesty. We do a truth and reconciliation. I think we give them an award and a trophy of sorts. We say thank you for your contributions to national security, but now is the time to come clean. Now, when I say come clean, I don't mean reveal any type of insights we've gleaned from this technology. I'm not saying that we need to reveal any type of what we call blue force equities or what type of technology we've been able to derive from it. What I'm simply saying is we should have disclosure and saying, look, we're not alone in this universe, whatever that means, whether they're from outer space, inner space, or frankly, the space in between. We now realize we are sharing this planet with a non-human intelligence, whatever that looks like, whatever that wound up manifesting itself to be. We're dealing with something that is intelligent like us and can do a lot of things that we can, and frankly, can do things that we can't. And I think that's the conversation. But remember, this goes back to the original part of our discussion. Don't admit a problem for which there is no solution.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
And so,
yes. But but what you're advocating for, which I think is beautiful and would be great to pull off, also very difficult to pull off. But what you're advocating for comes from a theological change in the government from a modern to a postmodern era. So the modern era says our job is to know. And if we don't know, our job is to just shut up about it until we do know and solve the problem. But I think the most embarrassing thing for the federal government is that the biggest secret about UAP is they don't know what the heck they are. I really think that's the taboo. That's why the taboo was built. That's why the stigma's there. It's because please don't know that we don't know. Right? And so,
it's like every parent's nightmare, right? When your kid comes to you and asks you an honest question and you don't have the answer, or you're not prepared to have the conversation, right? When your kid comes in and says, hey, talk to me about sex. What's the sex thing, right? Look what time it is. Let's have that chat next week. I've got an appointment, right?
Or you don't want to know about sex, right? Like, I'm just going to tell you that you don't want to know about this.
Right.
But this
and of course, the problem is if you don't have that conversation, what happens? They won't end up learning about it on the internet, which is what you don't want to happen.
Which we really don't want. Right. And so it's, but I feel such empathy for this transition because we are moving into a time of understanding the complexity, that the world is too complex. No one knows. Like, it's not like the fantasy that your government is going to be like a parent who's perfect and who knows and does the right thing. That's a fantasy, and it's a destructive fantasy. It destroys democracy. It destroys democracy. And
we forget about even the last 100 years, right? Look at the indigenous or Aboriginal people of North America and the way that we not only put them on reservations, and we slaughter their food source. Right? Just to subjugate them. And most Americans have no idea that saga, that terrible stain on America's reputation.
Well, it destroyed their culture and their food source. And
I think in today's modern law, in the Geneva Convention, someone could say it was genocide. I mean, what we did was horrible, right? And here we tell ourselves, oh, we're the best nation in the world, but we've done also a lot of bad things. I'm not saying self-loathing, right? I'm not saying that's a solution. The solution.
No, but there's a process like Germany went through after the Holocaust, right? Where you actually say, we did these things. We're holding the concentration camps as a reminder.
Right. To make sure you never do it again. Right. With regret again, right? Not no regrets. No, with regret. That's how you learn and you move forward and don't make the same mistakes again.
It's healing.
So let me change subjects just a little bit. And I'm thinking out loud, so please help me with what I'm trying to do here. So I think there are levels of ignorance, stupidity, malicious, knowing or unknowing,
ego.
In the American public, in our population.
Oh, okay, got it.
So, for example, there are, and I have talked to them, very serious government people who believe the UAP story is absolute nonsense. I mean, I don't know how you would describe that. They just have totally accepted the line, move on, there's nothing to see here. And so when you try to talk to them, as I have, I often, gently recommend they read American Cosmic, for example, and I don't think anyone's ever taken me up on that. Uh, but that's a layer of people, right? And then there's a layer of people, presumably, who know better, but still that's their public line. So there's a layer of people who say that there's nothing to see, move on, and that is what they sincerely believe. And then there's a layer of people who say that and they're being deceptive.
Yeah,
And
no,
then
Carmen,
there's so many more layers. I just want to talk about two last layers. And then at the layer of the general public, there are the people who, I don't even know how to talk about this, who believe everything they hear on the History Channel or on late night radio. They believe it all. And then I guess even worse are the people who believe that the world is being governed by reptilian something or other and human disguise or whatever. So and there's way more layers. So
it's probably the Jews as reptiles.
Yeah.
The what? The Jews. Oh,
as
well,
reptiles.
yeah. And then, yeah, you're right. And it gets commingled with existing bizarre prejudices and hatreds in American society. I don't know that. I don't know what I'm expecting as a comment on that. I have no expectation other than for you to comment on it.
I think it's a human thing. I don't think it's a government thing. I think, look, first of all, we are extremely insecure as a species.
Yes, amen.
We are very insecure. And so let's talk about the government piece for a bit, and then we'll talk about the private piece. So actually let's do the opposite. Let's start with private piece first. So there are two categories of truths in the world. There is universal truths like gravity, right? Can't deny it, affects us all equally, 9.8 meters per second squared. Then there are personal truths like political affiliations and religious affiliations, right? That can be just as real as a universal truth to the individual, but are not accepted as a universal truth by others, right? And so we have to recognize internally what is a personal truth for us versus what is a universal truth for everyone. So that's the first problem, and it's challenging because we all believe our personal truths are universal truths, when in reality, they're not necessarily. Two, we talked a little bit here. You had a really good point about people in government saying, I don't believe it. And then you have the true believers that say, I believe everything, right? Both are exactly the same. The true believer is no different than the true skeptic, because no matter what information and data you give them,
exactly. You can't change their mind.
I don't focus on them. I focus on the other 99.9% of America that has never really considered the topic before, and let them make up their own opinion by giving them data and facts, not telling them what to believe, not giving them an opinion as to what narrative they should follow. Look, you've been given a brain by God, use it. Here's the information. You figure it out what this means to you. Is this a personal truth? Is it a universal truth? Now, going back to our friends in government, look, and the scientific community. I went to school to be a scientist. I graduated microbiology, immunology, and parasitology, not parapsychology, the study of parasitology. And I remember a couple lessons and how things have changed in just that time. So there was I'll give you an example. If you look at Homo sapiens sapien in modern format, some people believe, and scientists believe, the consensus, it could be modern humans have been around for the last 200 to 400,000 years. So if you look at a 24-hour clock, it was only really the last 15 minutes of the 24-hour clock of modern human history, where it was the Greeks who recognized there were two life forms on this planet. You are either a plant or you are an animal. And it wasn't until the Renaissance, or the Age of Enlightenment, about 350 years ago, about maybe the last, 45 seconds of our existence, we realized that there was this entire other form of life on this planet we've been sharing all along that is neither plant nor animal. And it's the world of fungus. And so we pat ourselves on the shoulder, good little monkey. And then it wasn't until the last 120 years, last 5 seconds of our existence, towards the stroke of midnight, right? It wasn't until we had the ability to curve glass and put it in a little metal tube and famously shout the words, little beasties, did we discover the true alpha life form on this planet. And in fact, if you take all the biomass of every plant and the biomass of every animal and the biomass of every fungus and add it all up together, it still does not add up to the biomass of the true alpha life form on this planet.
Or so we believe now, because our ability to know anything
no, my
is
point.
always a function of our current tools.
Yes, correct. This is exactly my point. It wasn't until we had the technology to create the microscope and discover the hidden world of microorganisms did we realize, oh my gosh, that's the real life form on this planet, right?
Yeah.
That's inside everybody, that lives on the skin of the ISS space station, miles beneath the Arctic ice, right? And I also remember as a kid learning in college by some of the best professors that all life had to derive from photosynthesis. Not true. In fact, if you go to the bottom of the ocean to a black smoker, you will see life forms that thrive off of chemosynthesis, right? So every time we try to put Mother Nature in a box and us little monkeys think we have the answer, we don't. In fact, the one thing we're usually right on is that we're usually wrong at
That's
first.
Right.
And so I think, when you talk about people in the government or scientific community that say, oh, this is all a bunch of hogwash, lest we forget the lessons that we have been taught. Hubris is a you know what, right? Have you not learned? Every time we do simple things, we'll never be able to break the sound barrier. Wrong. We'll never be able to break the 4-minute mile. Wrong, right? We are constantly wrong until we actually do it. And I think that is part of our problem, because in government, we expect ourselves to always have the answers. And if I don't believe it, therefore, it must not be true, right? Oh, that's just a bunch of hogwash. Well, okay, but what happens when you finally look through that microscope and you discover the reality of our universe? Look, the same thing with the telescope. One can look at poor Galileo Galilei, where he proposed this heliocentric model of our solar system instead of the Earth-centric, and they almost burned him at the stake for it. He had to recant. They refused to even look through his very telescope that could verify the observations. Why? Because their belief was stronger than facts.
You know what he did for a living, right? He was
he did a lot of things, yeah.
Well, one of the things he did, he was Italy's best telescope maker.
Right.
So he actually, he made the tool that allowed him to discover new truths.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think we have to challenge ourselves constantly. We have to look in the mirror and say, in what I'm thinking and believing, is that a personal truth or a universal truth? Am I biased for any reason? Did my upbringing, maybe in Hebrew school or Sunday school, kind of prevent me from accepting new data? And I think that's a challenge. And then, of course, like you said, ego, right? We are very insecure animals. If you look, in fact, you want to know about ego, one of the second largest industries in the world, the first being defense, is cosmetics. Why is I mean, that's a fact, right? And by the way, men too, not just females, but males too. I like to have my aftershave like everybody else, and I like to put gel in my hair and what little I have left. So, that's pride and ego, and we create these images of ourselves of what we think we should be and who we should be, instead of who we really are. And as a politician and in government, that's even worse, because it's really hard to change your mind politically. If you make a statement, I believe this, and now all of a sudden in new information, you're going to believe that, you've spent a lot of time telling people you believe something else, right? And this is part of the problem I think we have now, even in our political world, between conservatives and liberals. Look, the vast majority of people want the same thing. We want healthy food for our kids. We want good education. We want good medicine and healthcare for our families. We want shelter. We want an opportunity to thrive. That's a human thing. That's not a Republican or a Democrat thing. And the problem is that we have found these another thing we like to do as humans is have our own flag, right? What do you identify as? Well, I identify as a Cuban American, or I identify as a gay and lesbian, or I identify as a Bible thumping, person in Tennessee, or I identify as whatever you identify as. We tend to feel comfortable with our own flags, and unless somebody else doesn't identify with our flags, oh, you're one of them, right? You're out there. Well, I feel I'm a liberal. Well, I'm a conservative. Therefore, we'll never have anything in common. When the reality is, I think most people have 90% of everything in common. It's just a few things we don't agree on, and we've polarized ourselves to the point where You either have to fall under someone's flag, or be left behind. And that's from a religious perspective, a governmental perspective, a political perspective. For some reason, we have this desire to coalesce around people like us, and maybe that's an evolutionary thing, right? Maybe that is what kept us surviving in the caves when the lions were trying to eat us. Look, I need
Well,
somebody
but
to
we
say,
also have this curiosity and desire to meet the new, to discover the new, right? Like that. So the whole reason why UAPs, UAP UFO have become interesting to anyone is that they seem new, even though they're probably ancient, right? But
but,
they
and you know
seem
what? It's
new.
not a political topic. It's
Yeah.
something that affects everybody, like I said, equally and yet differently.
Yeah,
And it's something that doesn't care what your political affiliation, it doesn't care what your religious affiliation, it doesn't care
that's
what
right.
country
It's
you're in.
transcendent. It forces us to transcend our own
Correct.
selves. Yeah. Yeah.
Correct. And
Yeah.
it's bigger than any one flag
Yeah.
that anybody has. It doesn't care what your religious affiliation is or your sexual side is or anything like that. It doesn't care. And it
Right.
shouldn't. And I think
Well, so how can we
that's one of the
disentangle?
beautiful things about this topic.
Well, you're
I
going to say, how
agree.
can we disentangle this?
I
And I
want
was
to
going to
know.
ask a question that is along these lines. So I'll throw this in. So, think about what in your mind would be a beneficial resolution of this topic. So,
Wow.
the way I like to ask this question of analysts is, tell me how the story ends. And of
Wow.
course, the fact that story ends is it's a strange, that's a bias too, because that's a strange,
No,
rational,
yeah, yeah. No, I
odd
got it.
bias
No,
that we
very
have,
insightful question. Actually,
but
Carmen, no one's
but
ever asked me that before.
but imagine, 10, 15, 20 years from now, whatever time frame you want. I'll just say that I'm pretty sure I wrote this down somewhere, perhaps on Twitter. I don't go there anymore, but I said, I believe that by the year 2050, humans will know that there is other sentient, non-human life that's not on planet Earth, that will be resolved and that will be now known. So that's something I've been on record for many years as having said. So what do you think?
Wow.
Can you paint is that sort of along the lines that you were going to ask, Julia?
Exactly that. I want a
Yeah.
vision. I want a vision. Lou, you're really good at healing, and one of the things you once told me is that you're in a healing arc in your life because you had to go through some really rough missions
Mm.
and where you had to do some really rough things, and that you're moving towards healing. So I think you might be exactly the person, the story
Okay.
of the wounded healer, exactly the person, a person. I'm not saying you have to be the only one because I know that you hate that imposter stuff, but that you are exactly the right person right now in this moment to ask, well, how does this get healed?
Yeah, that's it.
Wow.
Boy, I'm going to steal that question because that is a great way to phrase it.
Well, let me caveat by saying it is probably one of the most profound questions I've been asked. So thank you for that too. Let me caveat by saying I'm probably not qualified to answer it, but let me give my best shot at it. Um, if my colleagues and I are successful, I'm out of a job. I'm working at Walmart handing out stickers. And we recognize that um, as a species, there is much more to our existence, and but we have to be prepared for it. And to be prepared for it doesn't mean simply saying my idle curiosity I want satisfied. I want to know if we're alone in the universe. That doesn't cut it. If you want to know what is out there, you first have to know what's in here. It's how you take information. Are we really ready to meet neighbors of ours? I mean, let's face it, we're not really good stewards of our own house. We have a pretty messy house, and we treat our own family pretty crappy, to be honest with you. Are we really ready to go out and be ambassadors for our species when we are figuring every single way out to destroy each other, whether it's the Middle East or the Crimea or anywhere else that we're engaged with? The world is proverbially on fire, and it's hurting. And if we want that to change, we have no one to blame but ourselves. Look in the damn mirror. Look in the mirror and recognize, you know what? I can be doing things better. And it starts with each individual person. If everybody had the understanding that, look, I'm going to come into this world, I'm going to leave it a little bit better than I found it, this would be utopia. This would be literally a heaven on earth. But because it's the opposite, we take a little more than we give each time. We are in the situation we're in now. And I think we need real leadership in our government. To hell with politics. Let's stop voting people because they're a damn Republican or a Democrat. Let's vote people on who they are. If you tell me honestly and truthfully, and this is no disrespect to anybody, but the two individuals we have now are truly the very, very, very best this nation has to offer to run this country, I think we're in trouble. Now, I'm not saying one side or the other is better or worse, right? We all have got a problem. Certainly, I'm not qualified to run the country, but I also know that. That's why I'm not running for president. I think we can do a lot better, and I think every single one of us, if we took responsibility for our own thing, look in the news every day, and you have people that are carjacking and robbing stores and ransacking, right? And there's a problem, and it's easy for us to
and cheating. I mean, I think it's easy to overlook white collar crime on it when we're describing
no,
people.
it's cheating. No, it's the same thing.
Like cheating people.
No, you can do more damage with this than you can
exactly.
or a gun.
Right.
Absolutely. And this goes back to the corruption piece. Whether it doesn't matter whether it's personal corruption, religious corruption, moral corruption, financial corruption, governmental corruption. Corruption is corruption. And if we can all police ourselves a little better, then I think, we will be able to handle the truth much, much better.
What about love? What about love? How does love play into this?
Love is the single most important thing in the universe.
There you go. I agree.
No, it's true. Look, let's face it. There's only two motivations for what we do: love and fear. Mm-hmm. And that really is the root of all of our actions as a species.
Ultimately, and love heals fear.
That's right. Well, and fear is the absence of love. Mm-hmm. So, it's almost like a overpressure of love, and then you have this vacuum called fear, and in the vacuum, that's where all our proverbial demons lie. Love is why a mother will with her child, a new mother will run out in the middle of the street reflexively to protect her child from being run over by a car, even though she knows it's going to probably kill her in the process. Right? That's love. It's the reason why we do what we do for our family and our children and our friends. And that is the real reason of life. That's why we're here, to learn and to express ourselves and to give. And unfortunately, we don't live in a society that, we live in a society that encourages the opposite. It actually encourages the ego. It actually encourages vanity. If you look right now on social media, what do we see? Well, we see a lot of people on social media behaving poorly, a lot of famous people, right? A lot of people. Another example right now, I see it's almost grotesque, and I don't mean to rant here, but it really bothers me. Every day on the news, it's so-and-so endorses this candidate, news agency endorses that candidate. So who cares? Why is that going to now all of a sudden because Taylor Swift believes something, now I am too, or Lue Elizondo, or any name du jour, right? Don't worry about. I'm not being specific and beating up on necessarily her, Taylor Swift. I'm also using myself as an example here. Just anybody who's in the public eye, what does it matter that person is voting for so-and-so or somebody else? It's a personal decision. It's a sacred choice. Use the gray matter between the ears to make a decision, whatever that decision is. But don't be so easy to give that up to some celebrity or somebody like that. That's why when you are all asking me very specific questions, I'm really hesitant to offer my opinion, because I know people hang on to every word I say, and they can't. They shouldn't. I tell everybody all the time this, this is Lou, you're this figure for disclosure, and my biggest fear is that someone's gonna turn this crap into a religion.
It's happening. It's happening.
It will. And I keep telling people, don't do it. For the love of God, please don't do that. This is a scientific endeavor. This is also a personal endeavor for everybody to be part of. This is
a transformation of the world.
It is. It's an evolution of our species to whatever this next level may be. Yep. But don't screw this up by, like we do all the time, and turn it into a religion or have cults of personality and, oh, Lou, the great wise one has spoken. Hey, man, I put my pants on just like everybody else. I've got my idiosyncrasies and my vices, and I probably drink too much coffee, and I probably have way too much cholesterol. I'm just like everybody else, and so we have to avoid the urge. Anybody who steps up and becomes public about this topic or any other topic that affects the public, we have to do a better job of keeping ourselves in check. This isn't about me. This isn't even about you. This is about all of us. And everybody has a vote. Everybody has a voice in this conversation, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't know that there's anything more we can say at this point.
I think that's beautiful.
I think that's a wonderful place to conclude.
Yep. And
Great.
that's,
I mean,
and that's
I
why,
have many,
yes.
many other thoughts, but they will be shared at some other conversation.
Yes.
Great. And by the way, just for the record, I know a lot of people presume my political affiliation. They don't know it. A lot of people will look at a book's cover and make judgment. I caution people against that, because I never talk about my political views because they're personal, but I think people would be very surprised to know what my political views are.
Well, I like to tease people by saying I'm an anarchist.
Yeah,
By which I mean, I have enough faith in humans, and I can get teary about this, that I believe that we can self-organize to our benefit without needing to create institutions of power.
Carmen, I pray to God that is the case. Humans are capable of such beauty, and I've seen the best and the worst in humans all within 30 seconds of each other.
Right.
For another conversation, but I have faith in humanity as well. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. I will tell you, admittedly, there are mornings I wake up and ask myself, why the heck am I doing this? As I look at my wife just kind of groaning over, like, oh my God, this comment. I'm like, I'm so sorry, stop looking at social media. It's not good for you. But I agree with you. I have faith in our species. And as long as we continue to try to always to take the moral high ground and do things for the right reasons, I think we are ready for that next transition.
Yep.
Right.
Just have to remember to accept the love.
Yep. Yeah. Oh, again, that's the most important thing, isn't it?
Thank you, Lou.
Yeah.
That was
Carmen,
really,
my sincere honor and privilege. Thank you.
Igualmente, as they say.
That's right. Oye, ¿de dónde tú eres?
Yo soy puertorriqueña.
¿Qué parte?
De Caguas.
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 Yo viví en Guaynabo, Trujillo Alto, y Bayamón.
Bayamón.
I remember the mofongo and the pasteles.
Ajá, los pasteles, yeah.
Riquísimo. Soy cubano, pero tú sabes, es lo mismo, tú sabes, muy similar. Well, listen, ladies, thank you so much. It's been an honor and privilege, and anything I can ever do for you, please don't hesitate to ask.
Well, thank you so much.
Thanks,
All right,
Lou.
guys. Take care.
Peace.